Are you ready, Earthling? This will be a procedure you'll never forget. She stood before me, her body sculpted to perfection, skin a smooth, shimmering shade of emerald, her eyes glowing red with a mysterious and dangerous allure. Relax, Earthling, she purred, her voice soft yet commanding. This procedure won't hurt, I promise, unless you count the sensations your body is about to experience. My heart raced as she took a step closer, her presence overwhelming. Her cold fingers brushed against my skin, sending a shock of heat that spread like wildfire through my veins. The touch was electrifying, intense, and intimate, as if she were tapping into something deep inside me that I hadn't even known existed. She smiled, a grin full of secrets, and for a moment I couldn't breathe. "Don't worry, I'll be gentle with you," she whispered, her lips dangerously close to mine. But I wasn't sure if I wanted gentle. As she stepped closer, I realized this was no ordinary experiment. This was a procedure that would leave me changed, marked, and unforgettable. Don't miss out on the rest of this thrilling journey. Subscribe now for more out-of-this-world adventures and never miss a moment of the action. The Nova pulse sliced through the void, a sleek dagger of human ingenuity orbiting Zyra's radiant surface. Its hull gleamed under starlight, a compact fortress of chrome and reinforced polymers built for speed and survival. Inside, the cockpit hummed with holographic readouts, their blue glow spilling into the adjacent lounge. A cozy nook of leather seats, a low table cluttered with coffee mugs, and a viewport framing the alien world below. Zyra was a spectacle. Emerald forests pulsed with bioluminescent veins, weaving through valleys like living circuits. Oceans shimmered like molten starlight, their waves lapping against coral spires that pierced the clouds. Floating cities hovered above, their crystalline towers catching light in prismatic bursts. It was breathtaking, alien, and just a little unnerving, like stepping into a painting that might swallow you whole. Toren Valen, sprawled across a seat with his boots propped on the console, barely noticed anymore. 3 weeks of diplomatic wrangling had dulled the awe. The air carried a faint tang of recycled oxygen and his half-drunk coffee, grounding him in the familiar hum of the ship's systems. He tipped his head back, eyes half closed, muttering, "One quiet night. That's all I ask." The console beeped in faint protest at his boots, but he ignored it, savoring the rare silence. Toren Valen was a man who thrived on controlled chaos. At 32, he stood 6'1", with a lean, muscular frame sculpted by years of piloting fighters through asteroid fields and dodging diplomatic landmines. His dark brown hair was a tousled mess, green eyes sharp with a mischief that screamed trouble, and a smirk played on his lips like he'd already cracked the punchline to the universe's worst joke. Picture Tony Stark with a pilot's edge, same razor wit, same devil-may-care swagger, but with a knack for pulling off miracles under pressure. He'd once talked a rogue AI into rebooting itself mid-battle and charmed a pirate lord over cheap whiskey. But the Zyrans? They were a whole new level of weird. Enter Mira Sylvara, who chose that exact moment to shatter his peace. The lounge door slid open without warning. No chime, no knock, just her. She stood framed in the doorway, skin a radiant purple that shimmered like a twilight nebula, long white hair cascading past her shoulders like liquid moonlight. Her eyes, twin emeralds, gleamed with clinical focus, but her form-fitting bodysuit, a fluid, almost liquid fabric, clung to curves that were both alien and maddeningly human, hugging her waist and hips in ways that could derail a man's thoughts. She moved with a scientist's precision, every step deliberate, yet radiated a presence that screamed danger wrapped in allure. "Relax, Earthman," Mira said, her voice smooth as velvet but edged with a mechanical precision, like a translator chip filtering out warmth. "This won't hurt." Toren's boots hit the floor with a thud, his eyes snapping open as he bolted upright. Whoa, hold the interstellar invasion." He stood, hands raised in mock surrender, but a grin already tugged at his lips. You don't just stroll into a guy's ship looking like that and kick off with relax. What's the game plan, Purple Rain? Mira tilted her head, white hair swaying like a silken curtain, her expression unreadable. Mira Sylvara, zran biochemical. I require a biochemical response test to confirm cross-species linkage. Standard protocol for the treaty. Toren leaned against the console, arms crossed over his black flight jacket, his smirk widening. Standard, huh? On Earth, that's called crashing a party. Usually comes with an invite and maybe a bottle of something strong. Care to fill me in? She stepped closer, unfazed by his sarcasm, her boots silent on the metal floor. Your physiology may hold the key to our alliance. I need a sample of your bioenergy. Toren's pulse kicked up, but he kept his tone light. Bioenergy? Sounds like something I'd sell at a tech expo. You gonna plug me into a battery, or just wave a glow stick? Mira's eyes narrowed, studying him like he was a puzzle with too many pieces. The procedure stimulates your neural pathways. Non invasive. Efficient. He snorted, running a hand through his hair, the gesture buying him a second to process. Stimulate? You're tossing that word around like it's a weather forecast. Let's slow this starship. What are we stimulating? She didn't blink. Direct interaction with your autonomic systems. Human males respond optimally to targeted sensory input. Toren choked on a laugh, stepping back with a dramatic point. Oh, hell no. You're talking about jump-starting my rocket boosters? That's not science. That's a HR nightmare. Mira blinked, genuinely puzzled, her lips parting slightly. Nightmare? This ensures compatibility for the treaty. Our species share genetic markers. He waved a hand, still grinning but firm. Compatibility? Sweetheart, on Earth, we don't share markers without a conversation. Preferably over coffee, not a lab bench. Her lips twitched, a ghost of a smile that hit him like a rogue asteroid. You are resistant. Most Zyrans comply without debate. Toren spread his arms, mock offended. Resistant? I'm a goddamn national treasure. But I'm not signing up for alien science fair without a manual. She sighed, setting a sleek orb on the console, a device pulsing with faint green light, like a heartbeat trapped in glass. It measures biochemical output under controlled conditions. A baseline for our alliance. Refusal delays the treaty. Toren eyed the orb, then her, his grin softening. So I'm the schmuck holding up galactic peace? That's a new low, even for me. Mira's voice softened, just enough to throw him. You're no schmuck. You are uniquely suited. He arched a brow, leaning closer despite the warning bells in his head. Flattery now? Okay, I am listening. But I do this my way. No surprise hands on demos. Deal. Mira nodded, stepping back, though her eyes held as like a tractor beam. Acceptable, but you will comply. Toren picked up the orb, twirling it like a toy. Sure, Doc. For the greater good. But next time, knock. My heart's not built for ambushes, gorgeous or not. Mira handed him the orb, and her fingers grazed his palm. A fleeting touch that sent a jolt through him, like a spar from a live wire. Her skin was warm, impossibly smooth, and the purple glow of her arm seemed to flare brighter for a heartbeat. Toren froze, the quip on his tongue evaporating. Her white hair brushed his shoulder as she leaned in to calibrate the device, and a scent hit him. Sharp like alien herbs, sweet like forbidden fruit, dizzying enough to make his head spin. His gaze flicked to her lips, full and curved, dangerously close, before he caught himself staring. You gotta stand that close? He asked, voice rougher than he intended, his heart thumping like a misfired engine. Mira's emerald eyes met his, unblinking, a glint of amusement flickering in their depths. Precision is critical, she murmured, her breath warm against his cheek, carrying that maddening scent. Unless you prefer errors? Toren swallowed hard, his usual swagger faltering under the weight of her proximity. Get together, Valen. She's a scientist, not a damn enchantress. But his body wasn't listening. Every nerve screamed she was both, and then some. He forced a grin, stepping back to reclaim a shred of control. Errors? Nah, I'm a precision guy. Just need room to breathe, yeah? Your vibe's a little too high-octane. She straightened, her hair falling like a cascade of starlight, and nodded, but her voice held a trace of something. Teasing, maybe, or challenging. As you wish, Toren. The way she said his name, soft and deliberate, lodged in his chest like a stray bullet. Left alone with the orb, Toren sank into his chair, staring at it like it might sprout fangs. His mind replayed her touch, the herb-sweet scent, the way her suit traced every curve like it was mocking him. Trouble, he muttered, shaking his head with a wry chuckle. Grade A, Galaxy-class trouble. But even as he griped, a spark of curiosity, reckless, dangerous, flared in his gut. For the treaty, sure. For Earth's sake. And maybe, just maybe, for the enigma standing before him, purple skin and all. The Nova Pulse drifted in low orbit, its engines purring like a contented cat as Zyra's glowing ocean spun below. Inside the lounge, the air felt heavier than it had yesterday, charged with the memory of Mira's purple skin and that damn orb still sitting on the console, mocking Toren Valen with its faint green pulse. He slouched in his chair, one leg slung over the armrest, fiddling with a holographic star chart that flickered above his coffee mug. Zyra's cities winked on the display, floating marvels of crystal and coral, linked by bridges of woven light. Beautiful, sure, but beauty didn't explain why his gut was still doing backflips over a certain bioengineer's visit. One test down, one treaty to save, he muttered, tossing the chart aside. No pressure, Valen. The door slid open, and there she was, Mira Sylvara, striding in like she owned the ship. Her purple skin caught the lounge's soft lights, shimmering like a nebula caught in twilight, and her white hair, loosely bound, spilled over her shoulders like a cascade of frost. She traded the liquid bodysuit for a slightly less distracting tunic, but it still hugged her waist and hips in ways that made Toren's brain stutter. Her emerald eyes locked onto him, sharp and unyielding, but there was a flicker of something softer today. Nerves, maybe? He sat up, swinging his legs down with a grin. Well, look who's back. No surprise, ambushes this time, Doc. I'm almost disappointed. Mira didn't smile, but her lips twitched as she set a data tablet on the table. Your results are complete, Toren Valen. Her voice was smooth, that mechanical edge softened just enough to make him lean forward. You are highly compatible with Zyran physiology. Toren arched a brow, resting his chin on his hand like he was judging a science fair. Compatible, huh? Sounds like I aced the galaxy's weirdest pop quiz. What's the prize? Fancy title. Medal of Bioenergy. She ignored his quip, tapping the tablet to project a holographic model. A double helix spinning with glowing markers. This is your genetic profile overlaid with ours. The overlap is unprecedented. Toren squinted at the helix, his smirk fading. Okay, I'll bite. Why is it a big deal? You're not planning to clone me, right? Want to me's enough trouble. Mira's gaze met his, and for the first time, her voice trembled, barely perceptible. Zyra is dying, Toren. Our population is collapsing. We cannot produce viable offspring. You may be the key to our survival. The words hit like a cold shower. Toren leaned back, arms crossed over his flight jacket, his usual bravado faltering. Whoa, hold up. You're saying I'm, what, your cosmic lab rat? That's a hell of a sales pitch. Mira stepped closer, her hair catching the hologram's light like a halo. Not a rat, a catalyst. Your bioenergy could stabilize our reproductive matrix. He snorted, but his eyes stayed on hers. Catalyst? Lady, you make it sound like I'm jump-starting a starship. Not whatever this is. What do you need me for exactly? Mira hesitated, then straightened, her scientist's mask slipping just enough to show a crack of urgency. I propose you remain on Zyra for cultural integration. It will allow us to study the linkage further. Toren's grin returned, sly and teasing. Cultural integration? Is that code for dragging me to alien karaoke? 'Cause I'm warning you, I'm terrible at ballots. Her lips quirked again, and she leaned forward, voice low. I chose you, Toren. Your biochemical response, it triggered something in me. A reaction I cannot yet explain. He froze, her words landing like a rogue missile. Triggered? What, like a spark plug? You're gonna have to unpack that one, Doc. Before she could answer, a chime rang out, a Zyran envoy requesting his presence for a welcome ritual. Toren groaned, rubbing his temples. Great. More alien homework. Fine, but I'm holding you to that explanation. The ritual took place in the Nova Pulse's cargo bay, repurposed into a ceremonial space with glowing Zyran glyphs etched on the walls. A dozen Zyrans stood in a circle, their skin shimmering in hues of violet and teal, murmuring a low chant that vibrated in Toren's chest. Mira guided him to the center, where a crystalline device hummed, its surface swirling with light. This is a biochemical sink, she explained, her tunic brushing his arm as she stood close. It aligns our energies for harmony. Toren raised a brow, hands on hips. Harmony? Sounds like we're about to hold hands and sing campfire songs. I'm game, but don't expect me to braid your hair. She handed him a small, warm crystal, her fingers lingering on his. Place it here, she said, guiding his hand to a groove in the device. Their shoulders nearly touched, and her scent, those sharp, sweet herbs, hit him again, making his head swim. He cleared his throat, trying to focus. So, what? We're sinking like a bad holo date. This thing gonna zap me. Mira's eyes locked onto his, intense and unyielding. It amplifies connection. Relax, Toren. Her voice was a whisper now, and her hand slid to his hip, adjusting his stance. The touch was light, but it burned through his jacket, a current racing across his skin like a live wire. Relax, he muttered, voice huskier than he meant. You make that sound way too easy. Her fingers lingered a moment, tracing the edge of his hip before pulling away, and her gaze held a spark, amusement, or something hotter. You are tense, she murmured, lips curving slightly. It affects the sink. Toren forced a laugh, meeting her eyes. Tense? Nah, I'm cool as a comet. But you keep that up, and this crystal's gonna short-circuit. The device pulsed brighter, and the Zyran's chant swelled, but all he could feel was the ghost of her touch, searing his thoughts. The ritual ended abruptly when the Nova Pulse lurched, alarms blaring. Toren snapped to attention, sprinting to the cockpit with Mira at his heels. What the hell was that? He barked, sliding into the pilot's seat. The displays showed a Zyran skiff, sleek, armed, and definitely not friendly, firing plasma bursts. Anti-Alliance radicals, Mira said, her voice tight as she strapped into the co-pilot's chair. They oppose human involvement. Toren's hands flew over the controls, banking the ship hard to dodge a salvo. Yeah, they're about to hate my involvement even more. He pushed the Nova Pulse into a corkscrew dive, weaving through Zyra's upper atmosphere as the skiff pursued. Mira worked the shields, her fingers dancing across the console with a grace that almost distracted him. Shields at 80%, she reported, glancing at him. You are skilled. Toren flashed a grin, even as sweat beaded his brow. Skilled? I'm a legend. Hang on, Doc. He pulled a risky loop, grazing a floating city's edge to shake the skiff, which peeled off in retreat. The ship steadied, and Toren exhaled, slumping back. That's how we do it on Earth. Mira unstrapped, standing closer than necessary, her purple skin catching the cockpit's glow. You took a risk, she said, voice low. Why? Toren met her gaze, his usual quips faltering. Had to. Can't let the team down again. The words slipped out, heavier than he meant, and he looked away, jaw tight. A memory flickered. A failed mission, a lost squad, his fault. Mira's hand rested on his shoulder, light but firm. You protected us. That is enough. Her touch grounded him, pulling him back from the edge of old ghosts. He managed a crooked smile, covering the rawness. Yeah, well, don't get used to it. Heroics are bad for my brand. But her eyes held his warm and steady. And for a moment, the cockpit felt too small, the air too thick. Whatever this reaction was between them, it wasn't just science, and that scared him more than any skiff. The shuttle dipped through Zyra's atmosphere, its engines humming as it skimmed over a canopy of glowing trees. Toren Valen gripped the co-pilot's seat, eyes wide at the spectacle below. The forest pulsed like a living heartbeat, their leaves shimmering in waves of emerald and sapphire, threaded with vines that glowed like fiber optics. Rivers of liquid light wound through the landscape, reflecting off coral cliffs that jutted skyward, sharp as daggers. In the distance, a temple loomed, an ancient ziggurat of black stone, its surface carved with spirals that caught the bioluminescence, making it seem alive. Floating islands drifted above, tethered by tendrils of mist, their surfaces dotted with Zyran homes that shimmered like cut gems. It was like Pandora on steroids, a world so alien it made Toren's skin tingle with awe and unease. "Holy hell," he muttered, glancing at Mira in the pilot's seat. "Your planet doesn't do subtle, does it?" Mira Sylvara's purple skin glowed faintly under the cockpit's lights, her white hair unbound and spilling over her shoulders like a river of moonlight. Her tunic, less clingy than yesterday's but still tracing her curves, shifted as she adjusted the controls with a scientist's precision. Her emerald eyes flicked to him, catching his stare. "Zyra is balance," she said, voice smooth but warm, like she was sharing a secret. "Life here thrives on connection, not restraint." Toren grinned, leaning back with his hands behind his head. "Connection, huh? Sounds like a fancy way of saying no one's got personal space. Lay it on me, Doc. What's the deal with this place?" They landed on a platform woven from living vines, its surface pulsing softly underfoot. Mira led him into the forest, where the air hummed with a low, musical vibration, like the planet itself was singing. Trees towered overhead, their trunks translucent, revealing veins of light that shifted with every breeze. Tiny creatures, winged orbs no bigger than fireflies, danced around them, leaving trails of gold. Toren swatted one away, half laughing. "Okay, this is either magical or I'm about to get eaten by glitter. What's the vibe here?" Mira's lips curved, a rare smile that hit him like a rogue wave. "The vibe is harmony. Zyrans live with the planet, not against it. Every organism shares energy." He followed her to a clearing where a stone altar stood, etched with glyphs that glowed when she touched them. "This is a node," she explained, her fingers lingering on the stone. "It channels Zyra's life force. Our culture revolves around maintaining its flow." Toren raised a brow, hands on hips. "Life force? You're sounding like a space hippie. Next you'll have me hugging trees." She tilted her head, hair catching the light like a halo. "Would you prefer to hug me instead?" The quip was so unexpected he choked on a laugh, caught off guard. "Well, damn, Doc. Warn a guy before you swing like that." They sat by the altar, and Mira's voice softened as she spoke of Zyran life. How their cities recycled energy, how their art mimicked the planet's rhythms, how balance was sacred. But her eyes grew distant when she mentioned her mother, a scientist who defied her clan to study human genetics. "She believed we were linked to your kind," Mira said, tracing a glyph with her finger. "They exiled her for it, called her a traitor." Toren leaned closer, his smirk gone. "Sounds like she was onto something. Clans, huh? Guess every planet's got its stick-in-the-mud types." Mira met his gaze, a flicker of pain surfacing. "Mine still watch me. They fear what I study, what I feel." The weight of her words settled between them, and Toren felt an urge to lighten it. "Feel, huh? Careful. You're starting to sound human." "Don't worry, I won't tell." She smiled again, small but real, and it stirred something in him he wasn't ready to name. That night, they joined a Zyran gathering under twin moons, their light bathing the clearing in silver. Zyrans swayed to a melody woven from crystal chimes, their movements fluid, almost hypnotic. Mira offered her hand, hair glinting like starlight. "Dance with me," she said, not a question. Toren took it, grinning. "Only if you don't laugh when I trip. I'm more cockpit than ballroom." The dance was simple but intimate, their steps mirroring the planet's pulse. Her hand rested on his shoulder, warm through his jacket, and their bodies brushed closer with each turn. He caught her scent, those sharp, sweet herbs, and his pulse kicked up. "You're not bad at this," he said, voice low. "Got a side hustle as a dancer." Mira's eyes sparkled, teasing. "And you?" "A pilot who moves like water." He chuckled, spinning her gently. "Water? Nah, I'm more like a rogue comet, chaotic but charming. The crowd faded, and for a moment, it was just them, moving under the moons, closer than protocol allowed. The mood shattered when a Zyran elder approached, his teal skin dull with age, eyes cold. "Human," he spat, voice like gravel. "You taint our soil." Toren's grin didn't waver, but his grip on Mira tightened. "Taint? Buddy, I'm practically a galactic treasure. Ask anyone." The elder's gaze shifted to Mira. "Sylvara, you shame us. He is an intruder." Mira stepped forward, chin high. "He is our guest, and my choice." The elder stormed off, but his words lingered like a storm cloud. Later, Mira led Toren to a secluded grove for a ritual she called energy alignment, meant to attune him to Zyra's life force. A crystalline spire rose from the earth, its surface rippling with light like a trapped aurora. "Place your hands here," she instructed, guiding him to the spire. Her fingers brushed his neck, light but deliberate, tracing the curve above his collarbone. The touch was electric, sending a shiver down his spine that had nothing to do with the crystal's hum. He inhaled sharply, catching her gaze, emerald eyes that seemed to see right through him, inviting and dangerous. "Focus, Toren," she whispered, her voice a velvet command, lips close enough to graze his ear. "Focus," he rasped, throat tight. "You're making that real damn hard, Doc." Her fingers lingered, sliding a fraction lower, and the spire pulsed brighter, mirroring the heat in his chest. "You're doing well," she murmured, a hint of a smile playing on her lips. "Too well, perhaps." Toren forced a laugh, but his voice came out rough. "Yeah? Keep that up, and this thing's gonna explode, or I will." The air crackled between them, thick with unspoken tension, and he wondered how much was ritual and how much was her. The spire's light flared, then dimmed, and she stepped back, leaving his skin tingling where she'd touched. Alone in the grove, Toren ran a hand through his hair, muttering, "What the hell are you doing, Valen?" Mira's defiance against her clan, her story about her mother. It hit too close to his own scars, the ones he buried under quips. That dance, that touch, they weren't just science. She was under his skin, purple glow and all, and the thought scared him as much as it thrilled him. Zyra was no joyride, and neither was she. But he was starting to think he didn't want it any other way. The desert stretched endless under Zyra's violet sky, a sea of obsidian dunes that shimmered with heat and secrets. Toren Valen squinted through the shuttle's viewport, the Nova Pulse's backup craft rattling as it skimmed over jagged cliffs. Sand swirled below, catching the sun in prismatic flashes, while distant spires, ruins of a forgotten Zyran age, jutted like broken teeth. The air smelled of dust and ozone, a stark contrast to the lush forests he'd wandered with Mira days ago. This was no tourist trap. It felt like flying into a myth, one that could bite. He glanced at Mira Sylvara in the pilot's seat, her purple skin glowing faintly against her fitted tunic, white hair tied back, but fraying in the dry heat. "You sure this temple's worth the sunburn?" he quipped, leaning back with a smirk. "I'm more a beach guy than a dune rat." Mira's emerald eyes flicked to him, sharp but amused. "The temple holds answers, Toren. About Zyra. About us." Her voice carried that mix of scientist's calm and something deeper, like she was betting more than she let on. He raised a brow, hands behind his head. "Us, huh? You're gonna have to narrow that down. Planetary politics, or the fact I'm still buzzing from your last ritual?" Her lips twitched, a ghost of a smile that hit him harder than it should. "Both," she said simply, banking the shuttle toward a canyon where the temple loomed, a massive pyramid of black stone, its surface carved with glyphs that pulsed like dying stars. They landed on a cracked plaza, the ground littered with shards of crystal that crunched under Toren's boots. Mira led him inside, her tunic catching faint light from bioluminescent moss clinging to the walls. The air was cool, heavy with the scent of ancient stone and something metallic, like blood long spilled. Toren's hand hovered near his sidearm, his grin masking unease. "Place looks like Dracula's summer home," he muttered, eyeing a statue of a humanoid figure, its features eerily familiar, Too familiar. These guys Zyrans or what? Mira traced a glyph, her fingers steady but her voice tight. Not Zyrans. Older. From a time when others walked here. She activated a console, and a hologram flickered to life. A star map, Earth's solar system glowing at its edge. Toren froze, his quips dying. No way. That's home. Mira nodded, her white hair glinting as she leaned closer. 15,000 years ago, humans came to Zyra. They shared their essence, DNA, to save us from collapse. We are linked, Toren, deeper than I knew. He whistled low, running a hand through his hair. So, I'm not just a catalyst. I'm a rerun? That's one hell of a family reunion. Her gaze softened, almost tender. Not a rerun, a new spark. The moment shattered when a low rumble shook the temple, dust raining from the ceiling. Mira's eyes widened. Guardians, she hissed, grabbing his arm. Cultists. They worship the old ways. Humans are blasphemy to them. Toren's grin turned feral. Blasphemy? I am flattered. Time to jet, Doc. They sprinted for the shuttle, but a blast of plasma scorched the plaza, cultists in hooded robes emerging from the dunes, their weapons glowing like molten glass. Toren shoved Mira behind a pillar, returning fire with his pistol. These guys need a hobby, he grunted, dodging a shot that singed his jacket. Any bright ideas? Mira's fingers flew over a wrist device, hacking the shuttle's autopilot. Get to the cockpit, she yelled, her voice cutting through the chaos. They bolted, diving inside as the shuttle roared to life. Toren took the controls, pulling a stomach-lurching climb as plasma bolts chased them into the sky. Hold on, he barked, weaving through canyon spires, the Nova Pulse's backup straining under the onslaught. Mira braced beside him, her hair whipping free, purple skin stark against the console's glow. They're locking missiles, she warned, rerouting power to shields. Toren flashed a grin, even as sweat stung his eyes. Missile? These amateurs are cute. He pushed the shuttle into orbit, but a hit clipped their stabilizers, alarms screaming. Brace, he shouted, aiming for a nearby satellite. A barren rock dotted with crystalline caves, orbiting Zyra like a forgotten moon. The crash was brutal, metal groaning as they skidded into a cave's mouth, dust choking the air. Toren coughed, unstrapping to check Mira. You okay, Doc? Her hand found his, steadying them both. Intact, she said, voice shaky but firm. Thanks to you. He smirked, brushing sand from his hair. Just another day at the office. The cave glittered with crystals that pulsed faintly, casting star-like flecks across their faces. Outside, Zyra's rings arced across the sky, a ribbon of light against the void. Toren sank against a wall, catching his breath. Well, that was a party. You throw these often? Mira knelt beside him, her tunic torn at the shoulder, revealing more of her glowing skin. Not by choice, she said, her eyes searching his. You risked much. What? He shrugged, deflecting. Didn't feel like dying today. Plus, you're not half bad company. Her laugh was soft, unexpected, and it cracked something in him. She reached for a crystal shard, her fingers brushing his arm, and the air shifted. We're alive, she murmured, closer now, her scent, sharp herbs, sweet and wild, flooding his senses. Toren's pulse raced, but he held her gaze. Yeah, and I'm not complaining. Her hand slid to his lower back, light but deliberate, her touch warm through his shirt, tracing the curve above his belt. It was like fire under his skin, every nerve screaming for more. You make survival complicated, he said, voice rough, leaning in until their breaths mingled. Mira's eyes held a challenge, her lips parting slightly. Complicated is progress, she whispered, her hand lingering, pressing just enough to make him forget the cave, the cultists, everything but her. He grinned, one last quip to steady himself. Progress? Doc, you're rewriting my whole damn playbook. Their lips met, a slow, searing kiss that drowned out the world. The crystals flared brighter, as if Zyra itself felt the shift. The kiss deepened, a pull neither could fight. Starlight spilled through the cave, wrapping them in a cocoon of light and shadow. their bodies pressed closer, her hands finding his shoulders, his tracing her sides, the heat between them like a supernova's birth. The crystals sang, a low, resonant hum, as if the satellite blessed their union. When they parted, breathless, they lay together, her white hair splayed across his chest, purple skin warm against him. "We crossed the line," she murmured, her voice raw with wonder. "Good," Toren said, fingers brushing her hair. "Lines are overrated." They stayed there, tangled under the stars, the weight of their act sinking in. Not just passion, but a bridge between worlds. Toren's usual quips failed him. Her touch lingered in his bones, her glow a beacon he couldn't ignore. "Trouble," he muttered, half to himself, but his arm tightened around her. Whatever came next, cultists, treaties, or worse, he was in too deep to care. Mira shifted, her eyes meeting his, and he saw it. She was just as lost, just as found. For once, he didn't need a punchline. The satellite's crystal cave glittered like a frozen galaxy, its faint hum echoing the rhythm of Toren Valen's pulse as he sat against a jagged wall. Zyra's rings sliced the sky outside, a silver arc that felt too serene for the storm in his head. Mira Sylvara lay beside him, her purple skin warm against his arm, white hair splayed across his shoulder like spilled starlight. Their union hours ago, under those pulsing crystals, had shifted something fundamental, like a starship jumping to light speed with no map. He meant to keep it light, toss a quip and move on, but her touch lingered, heavy with meaning he wasn't ready to unpack. "You're quiet," she murmured, her voice soft but probing, emerald eyes catching his. "That's not like you." Toren flashed a grin, leaning back to dodge the weight of her gaze. "Quiet? Nah, I'm just plotting my next galactic heist. Gotta keep you on your toes, Doc." But his smirk faltered as she sat up, her tunic slipping to reveal the curve of her collarbone, glowing faintly in the cave's light. She took his hand, her fingers steady, and pressed it to her abdomen. "Toren," she said, voice trembling with a mix of joy and fear. "I'm carrying our child." The words hit like a hull breach, stealing his air. He stared, mouth half open, his usual wit short-circuiting. "A kid? Like our kid? You sure this isn't some Zyran lab glitch?" Her lips curved, but her eyes were serious. "No bleach. Our union triggered it. But the pregnancy, it's fragile. Our species are close, but not identical." Toren's hand stayed on her, the warmth under his palm grounding him as his mind raced. A kid. His kid. With her. Fragile. "Huh," he said, voice rougher than he meant. "Guess we're in for a hell of a ride." He pulled her close, one arm around her, and for once, no quip came. "Whatever it takes, Doc. I'm in." Her head rested against his chest, and the cave's hum felt like a vow. They couldn't stay. The shuttle was a wreck, but Mira's wrist device pinged a Zyran rescue signal. By dawn, a sleek transport plucked them from the satellite, ferrying them back to Zyra's capital, a floating city of crystal spires and woven bridges, suspended over an ocean that glowed like molten sapphire. Toren stood at a viewport, jacket singed from the temple fight, watching waves pulse below. "Back to the lion's den," he muttered, glancing at Mira, who'd changed into a flowing robe that still couldn't hide her radiance. "You ready for this circus?" She nodded, hair catching the city's light. "We must face them. The council, the cultists, the keepers. Our child is proof we can unite." The council chamber was a dome of translucent stone, its walls alive with shifting glyphs. Zyran leaders, some with teal skin, others violet like Mira, sat in a crescent, their eyes cold as Toren strode in, Mira at his side. The cultist leader, a gaunt figure in black robes, sneered from the sidelines. "Human filth," he spat. "You defile our blood." Toren grinned, hands in pockets. "Filth? Buddy, I'm a limited edition import. Collectors pay top dollar for this." Mira's hand brushed his, a silent anchor, as she addressed the council. "Toren carries the ancient link. Our child proves it. We are one lineage." A new voice cut through, a woman in silver armor, her skin a deep indigo, stepping from the shadows. The keepers disagree, she said, her tone like ice. I am Vera, and we guard Zyra's purity. Toren's eyes narrowed. Purity? Sounds like a bad sales pitch for worse wine. Vera's gaze locked on Mira. You've bred with this outsider. You'll doom us. Before Mira could reply, alarms wailed. Plasma blasts rocked the city, shaking the dome. Vera smirked. My hunters, she said, vanishing into a side passage. Toren grabbed Mira's arm, pulling her toward an exit as council members scattered. Time to move, Doc. Outside, the city was chaos. Zyran civilians fled as cloaked skiffs dove, firing on bridges. A keeper ambush, but Vera's presence screamed something bigger. Toren spotted a grounded patrol craft, its hatch open. Jackpot, he said, sprinting with Mira. They dove inside, but a plasma bolt grazed his shoulder, searing through his jacket. He hissed, slamming the controls to lift off. Okay, that stung. You good? Mira nodded, already hacking the craft's systems, her fingers a blur. Shields up, she said, voice steady despite the chaos. The skiff chase was brutal. Vera's hunters were no amateurs, their ships weaving like predators through the city's spires. Toren pushed the craft into a dive, skimming the glowing ocean, spray hissing against the hull. These guys are clingy, he grunted, dodging a missile that shattered a coral tower. Mira rerouted power, her hair whipping as the craft lurched. They fear our child, she said, glancing at him. It threatens their dogma. Toren flashed a grin, even as pain throbbed in his shoulder. Dogma? I'm more worried about their aim. Hang Dai. He pulled a hairpin turn, luring a hunter into a spire's base. Its explosion lit the sky, buying them a window to escape. They landed in a mangrove grove, the craft's engine smoking. Toren slumped against the console, blood seeping through his sleeve. Well, that was a party, he muttered, wincing as he stood. Mira was at his side in a flash, her robe torn but her eyes fierce. You're hurt, she said, guiding him to a mossy bank. Her fingers peeled back his jacket, gentle but firm, exposing the burn across his shoulder. She pressed a Zyran med patch to it, her hand lingering, tracing the muscle above his collarbone. The touch was warm, deliberate, sending a jolt through him despite the sting. Her purple skin glowed softer here, framed by mangrove vines that pulsed like veins. You need rest, she murmured, her voice low, eyes locking on his with a tenderness that stole his breath. Rest? He rasped, managing a crooked smile. Only if you're signing up as my nurse, Doc. Her fingers tightened briefly, a spark in her gaze, concern, but something hotter, too. You're reckless, she said, leaning closer, her breath grazing his jaw. But I need you here. Toren's hand caught hers, holding it against his chest. Right here, huh? Careful. You'll ruin my bad boy rep. The groves unwrapped them, their faces inches apart, but duty pulled them back. She handed him a comm unit, nodding toward the city. We end this, she said. Together. Toren patched a signal to the council, broadcasting from a grove. Listen up, Zyra, he said, voice steady despite the ache. Your temple data's real. Humans and Zyrans go way back. Mira's kid, our kid, is proof we're stronger together. You want to fight purity wars? Fine, but you'll lose more than you save. Mira stood beside him, her hand on his uninjured arm, her presence a quiet fire. The council's reply crackled through, hesitant but open to a summit. Vera's hunters had retreated, for now. As dusk fell, the ocean beyond the grove glowed brighter, reflecting Zyra's moons. Toren sat with Mira, her robe catching the light like a second skin. A summit, he said, half laughing. Me, playing diplomat. Universe has a sixth sense of humor. She leaned against him, hair brushing his cheek. You're more than quips, Toren. You're hope. He met her eyes, no dodge this time. Hope, huh? Long as it's with you, I'll take it. The weight of their child, their fight, settled like stardust, terrifying, beautiful. The floating arena hung over Zyra's radiant ocean, a marvel of woven crystal and living coral that shimmered like a captured dawn. Waves below pulsed with sapphire light, their glow reflecting off the arena's curved walls, casting prismatic flecks across the gathered crowd. Toren Valen stood at the center of a translucent platform, his black flight jacket scuffed but defiant, green eyes scanning the Zyran factions packed into tiered seats. Council members in flowing robes sat beside cultist elders, their teal and violet skin muted under the arena's light. The keepers, led by Vera's cold indigo glare, loomed at the back, weapons sheathed but hands twitching. Zyra's air hummed with tension, thick with salt and the faint buzz of bioluminescent plankton rising from the depths. Toren cracked a grin, hands in pockets, like he was about to pitch a used starship. "All right, folks," he said, voice carrying over the crowd's murmur. "Let's talk about not screwing ourselves into extinction." "Cool with that." Mira Sylvara stood beside him, 7 months pregnant, her purple skin radiant against a loose gown that flowed like liquid starlight. Her white hair was braided, framing emerald eyes that held steady despite the crowd's weight. She rested a hand on her belly, a quiet strength Toren couldn't stop glancing at. He'd faced worse odds, pirate fleets, rogue AIs, but this? Convincing a planet to bet on a half-human kid? That was a new kind of crazy. He activated a hollow projector, the temple star map flickering to life, Earth's soul system glowing bright. 15,000 years ago, he said, pacing, my people bailed you out. Shared DNA, save your asses. Now, Mira's carrying proof we're still linked. He gestured to her, voice dropping. Our kid's not a threat, it's a bridge. The cultist leader, gaunt and robed, stood, his voice like grinding stone. You taint our lineage, human. Toren's grin didn't waver. Taint? Buddy, I'm a collector's edition, one of kind. You're just mad I'm stealing the show. Mira stepped forward, her presence silencing whispers. The data is clear, she said, voice firm but warm. Our child carries both essences. Deny her, and you deny Zyra's future. Vera rose, armor glinting, her tone venomous. A hybrid? You dilute our soul. Toren snorted, leaning toward Mira. Soul? She's got more soul in one finger than your whole posse, lady. A council elder, skin like polished amethyst, raised a hand. Show us proof, she said, eyes narrowing. Mira nodded, uploading the temple's genetic scans. The hollow shifted, showing a helix, human and Zyran strands entwined, pulsing like a living vow. Murmurs rippled, some awed, others angry. Toren seized the moment, his quips giving way to something raw. Look, I get it. Change sucks. I'm a fly-by-the-seat guy, not a planner. But Mira? She's the real deal. Our kid's a chance to fix what's broken. You want Zyra to thrive? Bet on us. He met Mira's gaze, her faint smile steadying him like a starship's thrusters. The elder nodded slowly. We will deliberate, she said. Vera stormed out, but the cultists stayed, their silence a crack in their armor. Hours later, Mira's hand tightened on Toren's arm as they left the arena, her breath catching. It's time, she whispered, eyes wide with urgency. His heart lurched, quips forgotten. Time? Like now time. She nodded, and he half-carried her to a waiting transport, barking orders to a Zyran pilot. Biotemple, stat, move it! The city blurred past, spires flashing under Zyra's moons, as they sped to a dome nestled in a coral grove. The temple was alive, walls of translucent fiber pulsed with light, vines weaving patterns that sang of growth. Inside, a pool glowed at the center, its surface rippling like a starfield. Zyran midwives, their skin shimmering, guided Mira to a cushioned platform, their chants low and resonant. Toren knelt beside her, gripping her hand, his usual swagger useless against the storm in his chest. You got this, Doc, he said, voice rough but steady. I'm right here. Mira's purple skin gleamed with sweat, her white hair clinging to her brow, but her eyes locked on his, fierce and trusting. Together, she gasped, squeezing his hand as pain rippled through her. The midwives moved with quiet grace, their tools humming. Syringes of biogel, scanners that pulsed in sync with the temple's walls. Time blurred, Each of Mira's breaths a tether pulling Toren through fear he couldn't name. He'd dodged missiles, outrun black holes, but this, her strength, her fight, humbled him to silence. When the cry came, sharp and bright, it split the world open. A midwife lifted a tiny form, skin a soft lilac, lighter than Mira's, with a tuft of white hair and eyes like Toren's, deep brown, warm as earth soil. Leora, Mira whispered, naming her as tears streaked her face. Toren took the bundle, his hand shaking, and stared into those eyes, so small yet so fierce. "Hey kid," he choked out, half laughing, half dazed. "Welcome to the mess." He passed Leora to Mira, who cradled her against her chest, the temples glow bathing them in light. Toren's arm circled them both, and for the first time, he felt anchored, not adrift. The midwives stepped back, their chants softening, as if Zyra itself exhaled in relief. Word of Leora's birth spread like a solar flare. The council's verdict came swiftly, unanimity, a rarity. Cultists lowered their banners, some grudgingly, others awed by the temple scans confirming Leora's dual heritage. Vera vanished, her keepers fractured, but Toren didn't care. Earth's envoy sent a hollow message, grainy but warm, congratulating the alliance. "You've done it, Valen," the commander said, smirking. "Don't let it go to your head." Toren grinned at the screen. "Too late, boss. I'm framing this." Weeks later, Toren stood on a balcony overlooking Zyra's ocean, its waves a symphony of light under a twilight sky. Mira leaned against him, Leora nestled in her arms, tiny fists waving at the stars. The city hummed below, its bridges alive with Zyrans celebrating, not just a birth, but a future. Toren's jacket hung loose, his shoulders still sore from the ambush, but the weight felt right, like a badge. He glanced at Mira, her purple skin catching the ocean's glow, white hair dancing in the breeze. "You know," he said, voice low, "you forgot to mention that little test of yours would flip the whole damn universe." Mira's laugh was soft, her head resting on his shoulder. "I'd do it again," she murmured, eyes on Leora, then him. "All of it for you." Toren's quip caught in his throat, replaced by a quiet truth. "Same, Doc. Same." He pulled him closer, Leora's warmth a spark against his chest. The ocean sang below, its lights stretching to the horizon, and for once, Toren didn't need to fly. He was home, messy wild theirs,